All right, so here we have a list of widgets that we were working on yesterday that eventually is going to be part of our course management piece of software. This is from the point of view of the faculty that they can add new widgets to their course. Each widget will be hosting different types of content. Some content will be videos, some contents will be just headings or lists or just paragraph or some just raw HTML. And so we'd like to be able to see how we can be able to add new widgets. Yesterday we focused mostly on creating a static list of widgets and feeding it into a widget list component for rendering. All right, so let's go over that real quick. We had at our entry point, we had created a route, right, that allowed us to navigate to the list of widgets. So this is our route, right? You click on that and you navigate to the widget list container. The widget list container draws its data from a provider that is feeding it a store that contains the current state of the application, and that is being manipulated or generated by a reducer, the widget reducer. Right, the widget reducer, we create a store from the widget reducer, and that store is then fed into the entire application, of which the widget list container uses it to pluck out the current list of widgets and then renders them and iterates over them. The widget list container just maps the widgets array that is currently stored in the state and maps it to the widget list components widgets property, which is right here. There's our widgets array, which we are just going to iterate over. Right? We iterate over the widgets and render our list of widgets right here. And right now, the only thing that we have there is the title. So this widget list is being generated. This array of widgets is being generated by a reducer that has a responsibility of establishing an initial state and then feeding that state to whoever needs it, right, in the store, right, to populate the store with new versions of the state. Okay, make sense? All right. So what we'd like to be able to do now is, for instance, be able to remove a widget or add an existing widget. And I believe that's where we left off yesterday. We were about to start looking at how to delete a widget. Okay. So again, remember we are all these components are stateless components. They don't maintain their own state. Instead, they delegate this responsibility to other folks. Right? It says, you just give me the data and I'll render it. Right? And if I'm going to delete something, I don't actually delete it. I notify somebody that there's an intention to remove a widget. All right? And somebody else will handle that. In this particular case, it will be the reducer will handle that. Right? Very much like a model view controller, it's the controller who handles this, right? The components themselves don't know anything, right? They don't manipulate the data, they don't manipulate the model. Instead, they notify those in charge. So there it is. So we are, somebody's going to have to send us a function that we can call, and it's being fed here as an argument, which we then invoke on click, right? Notice that these are the buttons. There's a button that is being rendered alongside with each widget. Okay? Maybe we can paint it a little bit to make it look a little prettier. This might be a button, maybe danger. Right, so it renders red. Maybe we can pull it to the right-hand side. We can say float right. Right, pulls it to the right-hand side. So that it looks a little more professional. All right, so we need to remove the widget. And one of the things that we're going to need to know is, well, which widget are you trying to remove? Right? So we need to uniquely identify these widgets so that we know that it's this particular widget that we're removing. Right now, there's nothing that uniquely distinguishes any of these widgets, other than perhaps the title is different. Right? We could remove the particular widget whose title is. But then that would mean that two widgets could not have the same title. Right? So instead, let's create a unique identifier, and we could do that in the reducer where we have our initial state. We can say that all these widgets have a unique identifier, maybe some primary key that has some arbitrary unique value, right? So let's see. So I'll put some unique identifiers. Yes? Now we know that each one of these has a unique identifier, and for rendering purpose, just to make sure that it is indeed rendering, we can just render it right next to the title. So widget and then ID. Okay, we know that the ID is making it in there. Okay, so what we'd like to be able to do is invoke the delete widget, and this would work just fine, right? We can invoke some function, but this particular invocation, we need to parameterize, and we need to be able to pass something along the way. We can't do this, although this is we would be tempted to do this, but that's clearly wrong, right? It'll be invoked only once, right, and then never again. Right? Instead, what we want to do is says, I don't want to invoke it now. Right? I'll wrap it inside of a function that will be invoked at some later time, right, when the actual click event occurs. Right? So instead, we're going to wrap it inside of a function like that. Right? So now it's only invoked when we click on it. Okay. The syntax before ES6 would have been something like function, like that, right? That this would have been the old syntax, right? That's the old syntax, but pre ES6. Today we prefer the newer syntax. That looks something like that. Now, in this case, since it's only one function that is being executed, the curly brackets of the function is optional. Okay, makes sense. All right, so yeah, there it is. So somebody's going to feed us this function, right? And we're going to call it and pass it the ID of the widget. Everybody okay? All right. So who's going to feed us this function? Well, the only place that we can do that is in the connect function, right? The connect function is the one that maps the state to the properties, right, and the dispatch to the properties. These are the properties, right? Here's one property called widgets. That's data, and here's a function that we need to invoke, which presumably is going to generate a dispatch elsewhere. Yes, we're not going to handle the dispatch here, although we could, but we'd rather not. I'd rather not handle any dispatch. We want this component to be completely unaware that we're even using Redux. Okay? It doesn't care that you are using some Redux. Right? It is Redux, the one who's feeding it and doing the connections and whatnot. Right? But this component, I could test it independently of the fact that we're even using Redux. All right, anyway, so let's go back to the container. The container is the one who's feeding the data. Here's the widgets that we're feeding it. Now let's feed it the other attribute, right? The other property, the delete widget property, which happens to be a function. So let's feed it in there. So the way we do that is we create a mapper function. So this is a dispatcher to property mapper, right? That in this case. We are being fed, just like in the state to property, we are being fed the state. In this one, we're being fed the dispatch function. Okay, and so we'll say equal, and we're going to return a JSON object that maps the name of the property. The name of the property is called delete widget, right? And what is it going to be fed? A function. Right? That's the value of delete widget will be a function, and it's this function, right? This particular function that will be invoked when you click on that. Right? That what will it do? It'll call a dispatch, right? And here I need at least the type. At least the type, right? And we can choose some generic constant here that means something to us. We'll call it delete widget. It means something to us. Okay? But one of the other things that we need, notice that when this delete widget function is called, it passes the ID of the widget as an argument, meaning this function can take as argument the widget ID. Okay? And I can pass it as part of the JSON object that gets dispatched to the reducer. I can pass here other things. I can say that the widget ID that we want to remove is this particular widget ID. So this is the name of the property and then the value. They don't need to be called the same. Right? So maybe to enforce the fact, or to point out the fact that these don't need to be called the same, I'll call this WID and WID. Right? There's no magic here, right? It's just a plain old JSON object. All right, so that's what's being fed to the reducer. For that to actually work, this needs to be the second argument to the connect function. The first argument is the state mapper. The second argument is the dispatch mapper. Right? In that order. Right? In that order. That's how this one receives the state, but this one receives the dispatch. Right? Because this is the first one is going to function here, will receive the state, but the second one will receive the dispatch. Right? In that order. Right? Just make this a little easier to read. Each one in a line, different line. So this function, whatever you call it, doesn't have to be called state to property mapper. Right? It doesn't matter. The name doesn't matter. Right? But it will receive as argument this current state, and the second one, whatever you call it, right, will receive the dispatch function that you can then use to map your properties to the dispatch function. Excellent. All right. All right. So now we have the dispatch function being invoked, right? Dispatched to the reducer. The reducer is now receiving these actions. Okay. So let's go to the reducer. The reducer, we hadn't even bothered to do anything with the action. Right? We're just ignoring it. But indeed, the second argument to the reducer is those actions that are being dispatched. Right? All right, so let's make this a little bit easier to read. Put this in separate lines. And right now, it was always returning the same state, right? This initial state. Right? But now, we'll generate different state depending on whether you're adding a new widget, deleting a widget, updating a widget. Okay? So we're going to do different things depending on the action type. Right? So if the action type, in this case, if it's, what was it called? Delete widget. Right? If is delete widget, then we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're just going to return the state. Right, so if it's delete widget, we're going to do something. Otherwise, we're just going to return the state, the current state. We're not going to change the state. Okay, so what are we going to do? We need to generate a brand new JSON object. We used to have this JSON object. We need to generate a brand new one. Right, that has, it's almost identical, minus that particular widget that you're removing. Okay? We need to generate a brand new object. So we're going to say return. This is the object that we're going to return. Okay? It needs to have the same schema. So here's widgets. Right? And widgets is going to be what? Well, it's going to be an array. Right? But it's going to be an array that does not include that particular widget. Right? Depending on the ID that is being passed as an argument. Right? So remember, action, not only does it have type, but it also contains now this widget ID. Okay? So the action, this object, that object is this object right here. This action object is being passed along to the reducer. Okay? So we have the type in there. That's a type. But we also have the widget ID. So how do we generate here a new array? We could do it, a brand new array, iterate, for loop, blah, 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 blah. And if we find the ID, we can splice it out. We could do that. Or we have JavaScript functions that do this, right? We can iterate over the original array, over state, widgets, right? That's the original array. That's the current list of arrays. We can do a filter, right? So a filter is a function that iterates over an array, right? And if you return true, then the current element is left in the array, right? In the resulting array. If you return false, then it'll skip over that object. Make sense? Okay. All right. So here it is. So filter takes as argument a function, a filter function, and the filter function returns either true or false. True meaning yes, leave the object in there. False, do not include that object. Okay. All right. So here's the widget. Here's the widget object being passed as an argument, and here's the function. All right, so here's the argument of the parameter of the function, and we're going to return true or false. All right. So we want to return a true if the widget ID is not the ID that we want to remove. Right. So we're going to say is the widget dot ID different than the action widget ID? Right. If it's different, then return true. Yes. If this returns false, meaning the ID is if the ID is of the widget is the ID of the one I want to remove, then I want to remove it. I'm going to return false. Okay. All right. So now widgets is going to be this brand new array, that is going to contain all the original objects minus the one that has the ID. Okay. All right. So let's try it out. Okay. Notice that it removes it. Right. It generates this brand new object, right, that gets replaced and sent over as a brand new object, which then gets what? It gets sent over the container. And the state to property mappers gets executed, right? It copies the widgets from the state that now includes one less widget and gets sent over to the widgets property in the component. And the component has a brand new list of widgets to render. Right? And then iterates all the widgets without that widget that you just removed. Everybody okay? Right? For this to work, you need to guarantee that this object has changed. If the object hasn't changed, right, the Redux will not trigger any re-rendering. Right? If for some reason you see, well, why isn't my thing? I'm clicking and I'm doing this and that and the other, but I don't see the DOM updating. It's because somehow this object, right, has not changed. Right? What Redux will do is will compare your new object with the old object. It says, well, they look the same. Right? I'm not going to trigger an event. I'm not going to push this. I'm not going to notify anything because nothing has changed. Right? There's no re-rendering. Right? So you need to guarantee that this object somehow has changed. Right? If it has changed, then the whole rest of the pipeline generates a re-render. Everybody okay? All right, excellent. All right, so let's now focus on perhaps being able to create a brand new widget. Right? So we know how to remove a widget. Let's take a look at being able to create a brand new widget, and we'll do that next.